Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this session of Synthetic Intelligence Forum online. My name is Vic, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this session today. We have a really interesting panel discussion on privacy and AI, and we are joined by three friends of mine, also three experts in the field. So very happy to have this really interesting conversation take place today. We're going to have Ikjot joining us from the University of Windsor, where she's an assistant professor in the computer science department. We have Sepide, assistant professor in computing and information science at University of Maine, and also my friend Mariam, who's joining us. She's a mentor at the Founder Institute. So really between our panelists, we represent a number of different viewpoints, a number of different intellectual traditions, different research backgrounds, different industry backgrounds. So really, this is a topic that transcends many different areas. And so very delighted to have the caliber of panelists joining us today. So in the interest of time, what we're going to do is I have a number of questions that I've prepared that I'll ask, and then we'll have all of the panelists comment and share their insights. And then after that, we'll open up the panel for questions. So feel free to use the chat box to submit your questions, and I'll bring them up on the screen, and then we can get started. So the first question that I want to start with here is the following. And I'm going to share this, have this go to Ikjot first. So Ikjot, the first question is, the field of privacy and AI has evolved rapidly with many technological advances. Which technical advance in specific in this domain of AI and privacy are you looking at the most closely in terms of its potential, in terms of its relevance for really making an impact in the context of applied AI and applied data science? So over to you, Ikjot.
Thank you so much, Rick. This is an interesting question. Somehow involved with the AI. And privacy is one of the issues where it's more about data collection and how you're sharing and using it and how you are going to manage it, the data that you collect. So my work was closely related to connected vehicles, and then you can understand that how self-driving cars in future are going to collect data and using the sensors. And that's one of the domain where I was looking how we can, in the smart city scenario, what would happen if we have data collection and what would be the impact on the privacy. So there were some of the main concepts that needs to be followed right now, which is like privacy by design. And when you embed some of the technologies, it's really important to see what we have learned in past decades, and then how we can protect data and build a system which already have privacy preserving techniques already embedded in them. So PETs are some of the privacy enabling technologies, right? So you need to be considering that when you're building new systems for the future for smart cities. So that's the domain that I've been working on, and I can talk more about it in later conversations, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Ikjot. That's a great question. So Sepide, I'll turn to you now. So Ikjot brought a number of points up. She mentioned privacy by design. She mentioned differential privacy. In general, there's a notion of privacy enabling technologies, privacy protecting technologies. So this field is certainly quite dynamic. From your perspective, Sepide, what is sort of something that you're looking at most closely as having the most promise in terms of its application?
So thank you, Vic, for inviting me. The concepts that I am very interested in are basically to make sure that we don't just collect lots of data without protecting privacy. And differential privacy and federated learning are some of the concepts that were introduced in the last decade, which are very interesting, that you basically not only collecting lots of data, but you're also ensuring that the privacy of the individuals are protected. Lots of big companies are working on different aspects of these differential privacy or federated learning. And some of the goals is that instead of having moving basically all the data to the data centers, the source of the companies, they do the analysis on the devices themselves. So devices become basically the tool for doing machine learning experiment. And both, for example, Apple and Google are working on these topics from different point of view. Combination of, for example, federated learning and differential privacy Google is working on. the difference between these two companies also is very interesting. That for Apple, it is opt-in system. So you basically, as a customer, you decide that you have a choice to see if your device wants to be part of this experiment and analysis or not. And this is something that also goes hand in hand with all other privacy enhancing technologies and privacy by design, to incorporate the requirements and design of like privacy aspects in the design of the system, and having it in the whole life cycle of privacy engineering.
Great. Thank you, Sapide. So, Mariam, I'm going to turn to you, and just a variation on this question, in terms of what's a very promising technology. Your background is very interesting because you have sort of a research perspective that you bring to the table from a legal perspective, governance, oversight, compliance, but also looking at technology. And Sapide and Ikjo talked about specific technology from a technical perspective. In your mind, your space is where it really meets the road, and you advise startups. I'm sure every startup is now an AI startup. So which technology are you most studying closely to see that it has some impact in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to admit, I'm not studying a technology per se because I'm not from the tech world. But what I found is that if there can be technologies that kind of harvest the power of AI and information without violating privacy, that's really where the future is. So what I'm most interested in is processes whereby we can derive information and conclusions to help us further society without infringing on privacy. And obviously, some of the things that have promising futures are differential privacy, as well as secure multi-party computation. However, I don't create these, so I'm not really sure how they work. I'm mostly interested in how they can secure our right to privacy while allowing us to grow with the information.
I agree. I think a number of interesting points were raised. Like from my perspective, also it's sometimes hard to pick one because oftentimes you have to use them in combination. So if we think about, for example, differential privacy, where we are sort of introducing noise into the data set or the model to make it so that individual records can't be identified, but the statistical signature, the statistical identity of the overall data set remains. I think that's an interesting piece. I know Ikjo talked about that, and you talked about, Mariam, about some of these secure multi-party computation, and Sapide talked about homomorphic encryption. So to me, it's sometimes one is kind of spoiled for choice because there is so much advanced research going on, and now a lot of the research is translating into real world solutions. But I think what I'm hearing from everybody is that it's not really one silver bullet. There's lots and lots of things that have to be used, and in idiosyncratic context, they are quite different. So, okay, that's great. That's kind of an overview. It sets the tone. Let's get to the next question then. And the next question here is, basically, product owners and platform operators in the AI and data science space need to navigate a complex landscape of laws and regulations. We know, for example, the General Directive on data privacy from the European Union. So is there an overarching framework that can basically support these professionals to maintain and achieve compliance? So how about for this one, Mariam, we start with you because this is certainly more of your area.
Yeah,
So
this is my area. So when I hear like overarching framework, I always think about like medieval ages where there were guilds and they would organize themselves and have their own standards. So there would be the sword makers, the pottery makers. And I think we're kind of at that stage in this field where we don't have this overarching framework that everybody subscribes to just yet. But I think in the near future, we'll see that if we really want to advance the use of AI without all these legal issues coming into play, we need to set industry standards from the bottom up. So not wait for the legislator or the governments to come and tell us how it should be. For example, the GDPR is the government-based initiative. But the groups themselves that are creating this technology need to really come together in a forum and agree on what the standard is. Because right now there's multiple standards. And while they all have the same goal, they don't all say the same thing. And that can be very confusing for the end user and the regulator.
So that's great, Mariam. Ikjot, I'll turn to you now. So you work with a number of vendors in the autonomous vehicle space. And certainly when you talk about autonomy, there's all kinds of things. For example, in a self-driving car, you may have a computer vision camera that is looking on the street and it can possibly look at people's faces. So like you're very much researching a space where this question becomes very relevant. So how do you advise your research colleagues, etc.? What are you looking at when it comes to helping people to maintain and then to achieve and then maintain compliance with privacy regulations?
Actually, Vivek, it has a ripple effect. If you see it from, you just mentioned the computer vision, which is a LiDAR system, right? So I often used to think in the beginning, I was not in LiDAR systems or computer vision, but I started learning that it's not just the LiDAR system. Today we have dash cams as well. So what happens if we started using AI on those systems? So what would happen with the normal cameras that we are using? We start collecting that data and we don't know where it's being shared and stored. So that was the another problem. And then you use the AI algorithms, and based on that, I think it's more about not the what's happening right now in this current scenario. It's we think about the notice and consent. Um, when we have the terms and condition, I believe that customers supposed to read it, but it doesn't happen. So I think the responsibility should shift a little bit from end user to businesses for the privacy. And what happens for the business models and the processes, they need to take care of what data they are collecting, and they need, as Mariam just suggested, they need to take responsibility about this right now. So if they take responsibility and build the standards and the systems in a way that processes doesn't affect the end user. So let it be self-driving car, LiDAR system, and if it's an authoritarian like a Chinese government or any other government which want to use AI to detect multiple things, right? It can be anything. And without your permission, then that's a problem as well. So who would be responsible? So it's not just the government. Technology is enabling something where end user is not having a consent. So we need to come up with a solution somewhere in the middle where it's an overarching standard, but the regulation should be built on top of it later on. And I think from the self-driving perspective, um, so if you're building an AI system, just be very sure what kind of AI you are using. It shouldn't be biased or discriminatory. So it's in the computational logic itself.
Very interesting. So one thing Ikjot and Maria mentioned, Sapide, I'll turn to you, is really when we talk about AI, where we're talking about making predictions or doing any kind of output coming out of an AI model, really when it comes to privacy, one has to look at the full value chain. One has to look at the full data chain here. As Sapide, as Ikjot just mentioned, Sapide, that really it's not just a question of the model and the predictions, it's you have to look at who acquired the data, how did they acquire it. So from your perspective, Sapide, are you aware, or in your perspective, what are these frameworks that can help somebody take this end-to-end look at the full privacy value chain as opposed to just focusing on AI? Because after all, the privacy breaches may happen in the context of an AI model, but much else somewhere else in that value chain. So what's your thoughts on that?
So both Maya and Eckhart, they brought like very good points. And one thing that I liked from Eckhart was that we should not put the users responsible for understanding what are the like privacy implication of the data that is getting collected by them. And just having notice and consent is not enough. And this is something that privacy engineering and privacy by design are trying also to do, that we start from beginning. So as developers, you start from like looking at privacy from early on before even collecting the requirements, and including those privacy aspects in the requirements design, development, and testing. So if you look at like software development lifecycle, and coming from software engineering perspective of it, that you start from like beginning, like where you are looking at what are the requirements for developing certain software, and then deciding that, okay, how you can incorporate regulations, privacy regulations, or also protecting the security and privacy of the individuals. Transparency is one part of it, part of privacy by design, which means that we are basically effectively also giving, noticing the user, but that's one of the aspects of it. Beside that, there are lots of techniques that focus on how to give shorter, for example, notice to the user, but they are not looking how to give means to the developers to understand how to write, for example, good privacy policies so that they match with what actually their devices like or the applications are doing. There was some research a few years ago that they were analyzing around 17,000 applications of Android, and they found out that in half of them that they needed to have privacy policy in place, there were some discrepancies between what their privacy policy was saying and what the actual code was doing. And this is something that is very challenging. There are two parts of it. One is that what the code that they are developing and what the libraries that they are using. One of the things that in my research we're focusing on is that how to basically like use AI techniques to generate statements from the code itself so that it matches with the with privacy implication of the application. So these kind of discrepancies doesn't exist. But both Mariam and Ikat said that like it has to be a combination. So regulations are necessary. Developers, like, I mean, from development point of view, we also need to like give the means to the developers to understand what are the privacy aspects and use that. And then we also need like the users to give them choices to, like, it's not that either you take the application or you leave the application. They have something in between. So all of these have to go hand in hand. And I think also these new approaches like the privacy by design or privacy engineering, they are trying to bring that into place.
Thank you, Sepide. That's a great question. So I'm gonna just keep the mic with you, Sepide, and I'll because this question that I'm going to ask builds on something you just said. So I'm going to put this question up. So the thing here is that, for instance, that's the question. So when you think about privacy goals and when you think about surveillance, the potential for surveillance, oftentimes people, say that, okay, if we give an organization or the government certain data, then of course they can use it for what they're saying they're going to use it for, but then they can also use it for other situations which the people may not necessarily be comfortable with. And right now, if you think about COVID-19, we live in a world where there's all kinds of contact tracing apps which are implementing different techniques to sort of trace where people are and who they come into contact with. So of course, on the one side, there's a great benefit to this, where if somebody gets infected, then you can retrace that if they were a vector, somebody else could have gotten infected. But then people also are rightly concerned many times that, look, well, if this data gets used in some other way or it gets leaked or whatever. So the point is that, a lot of people rightly or wrongly think about surveillance on the one extreme and sort of privacy sort of on the other extreme. And I know, Sepide, your background is in software engineering, conceptual modeling. So you really build these techniques that help people to evaluate trade-offs. So focusing on this, how would you advise people to make systematic and structured trade-offs in situations like this? Because it's not necessarily binary. It's not that you give your data and now completely you're exposing yourself. On the other side, like you just said in your previous answer, it's not as though if you want to hold back certain something that the other party should completely deny a full service to you. So are there any frameworks or are there any techniques or mechanisms, perhaps your research, how can people use that to make these kinds of trade-off evaluations?
So this is a very good question and very interesting. I bring up the Free Information Privacy Principle that most of the regulations are also basically following that. And one of the aspects of the Free Information Principle is that you have limited collection, limited use, and you only use for the purpose that you collected the data. And if the purpose is to notice, for example, user about the COVID exposure, that's the only, like, you have to notify user about that, and you only use the data for that purpose. And limited collection also basically says that if you can get the data some other way, you will do that. So you are not collecting data if you can basically reach the same goal by not collecting that data. So that helps. That's like you don't have absolute surveillance, and you will only so you don't repurpose the data that you're collecting unless you're explaining to the user again and get new consent from the user that, okay, now we are going to use it for another purpose. I'm not sure if you have checked the new COVID application in Canada. That's one of the interesting basically application that was also approved by people like Anne Cavoukian that created privacy by design concepts. But it doesn't collect information that is not necessary. It collects the location based on Bluetooth, and then it updates it every 15 minutes. So tries to minimize the collection of data and only collects what is needed to do contact tracing with COVID. And I think that we can achieve that, and it shows that in some of the successful basic cases that we achieve it. But we need to stick with that. That's we don't just repurpose without notifying the user. And this is what the regulations are also trying to tell. I think Mariam probably knows better from the regulatory point of view, but as far as I know, this is one of the important parts. So, and then you also need to protect security. So it's not just privacy. You get the data, you also have to make sure that there's no breach of privacy with like having some security flaws or security exposure.
Okay, thank you. So Mariam, we'll go to you next and then to Ikjot on the same question. But Mariam, so Sapide mentioned that, that from the perspective, from a governance perspective, and I think it also goes to something you had said, that users should not ultimately be the ones holding the bag to make sure that their data is being used by some third party in the right way. So what's your perspective on these trade-offs of privacy versus surveillance? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So how would you help even the startups you advise or colleagues you advise in the industry? How do you help them to make these decisions in a structured and systematic manner rather than sort of an emotional manner, which may be misinformed by leading headlines of the day, for example?
Sorry, I was on mute. I said I love this question because you have to think about it a lot. And what I think is that in the future, we're going to have a new job, which is going to be people who audit AI. And so even though we think AI is going to take some jobs away, we're going to need people who have oversight of companies are doing what they say they're doing. Luckily, I think consumers are becoming increasingly informed about their right to their data, their privacy, their security, especially in Europe. Having lived in Europe and now in America, I really see the difference in cultures. Europeans are very concerned with their data, with their privacy, and Americans, not so much. They will download apps because they sound fun, and they don't really care what data these apps might be mining. For example, the apps that make you look older, or like these things, or you really shouldn't be downloading it because they're taking all your data. But so I think in the future, we're going to move towards this space where we're going to have auditors for these companies that have access to our data. In the same way we have financial auditors, public accountants, because there's no guarantee that the companies are going to do what they say they're doing. So we need this basically a new body. And I think that's going to be a future career for a lot of people who are interested in this space, but perhaps don't have the skills to code. So that's my prediction here. And I think eventually we're gonna meet in the middle, and there's no longer going to be a huge privacy and security concern.
Okay, that's interesting. So Ikjot, I'll turn to you with the same question with a slight variation in that your research looks a lot at autonomous vehicles. And, one can imagine that obviously nowadays with autonomous vehicles, even by, if it's a one person driving a car, you can learn a lot about that person's life just by looking at the behavior of how that car is driven. Of course, now people come and sync their smartphones to their car. So who knows, your contact book is now in there and your address book and all of that. So, is there a difference in your mind that when it comes to, for example, the driving patterns of a self-driving car that are being mined for some patterns in some AI model versus actually mining a person vis-a-vis maybe their smartphone, which they're carrying with them? So do you see an actual difference there? Should this surveillance versus privacy conversation be a bit different when people think about people's data directly versus people's data through a proxy such as their vehicle and everything that kind of gets packaged up in that? What's your perspective on this?
Actually, I can give you really good insight about that because my entire thesis was on privacy. It was about location tracking and connected vehicles. So we still don't use the connected vehicle applications, or this is still in process. It's in development. So autonomous vehicles it's more focused on autonomy and so self-driving, where you would not be behind the steering, right? I was working on connected vehicles where it will build the internet of vehicles and all the vehicles will be able to talk to each other. So what happens in that case, when vehicles are talking to each other, they are talking at a very fast rate in the real time, and they share the information with each other, all the vehicles. And now I'll loop back to what Mariam said and Sapida said about the regulations plus minimum baseline requirement for getting the information information from the nearby vehicles. So if we are going to get a lot of information, then it's about how you're saving it, storing it, sharing, and using it on the device itself. So that was one of the challenge. So building those systems, that's what's happening right now. So we are building those systems for V2X, which are privacy by design and security by design. So I was focused on location tracking. So definitely, if we do not care what happens with information beyond that application that we are developing, then there's a collection of data, and over time, there's definitely location tracking. There was a study, because this research has been going on for 20 years now, or at least 15 years actively. So there has been research where you can definitely think about a city, and you're going from your work and home, not in this situation, but earlier. So usually you go for the trips, for groceries, or you do certain things, and you always use one vehicle which you own. So that's so interesting to see. If you have just passively eavesdropping those packets or the data, then what happens over time, you will realize that 60% of the total population, you can realize what their trips are and what their behaviors are. And they do not want to, nobody wants to disclose what their trips, what they're doing, right, in their regular life. But that happens over in an overarching, if you're putting it on a city scenario, then you will be able to know your citizens, what they are doing on their regular basis without their name. But if there is a surveillance based on the cameras, then you can think about that. So you are going to use AI, get the information from these connected vehicles, plus using surveillance from the cameras, and now you can associate all this information, and there's a direct privacy breach, right? So this is surveillance versus privacy, what you just mentioned. So I developed it was the first step towards the privacy assessment framework, where we can have equitable assessment, where we can have stronger adversaries, and then we passive adversaries, where we can place them strategically how an attacker thinks, and then we use that to model and check how protected we are, or how anonymized this communication can be, and so that you don't disclose. But definitely there's a lot of research required in that area, and a lot of, I think it's more about awareness. If more people will be working on this problem, then we'll solve it faster, and it will be built in the
Very
systems. Yeah.
Very interesting, Ikto. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And I was going to say there's something you described with that 60% statistic, that you can start to figure out which trips people are taking. And I guess a not safe for broadcast question, which we won't raise, but I'm just making it as a bit of a side comment, is to understand why people are taking those trips. I'm sure that people, not only do they not want to know where they're going, but they don't want everybody to know why they're going wherever they are going. So that's the reason I was asking that question around, if you can understand people's travels, can you now start to understand the motivational structures behind why they do what they do. So the next question I have is, before one more question for everybody, and then we'll open up to a lot of questions that have come through in the chat. So this is kind of the comment, the prelude to the question is, privacy in AI is a topic that's mostly raised when there is a breach, or there is a disclosure or exposure of confidential information. Why is it that in society, generally, we find that this kind of an issue becomes a big news? But also, from what I can understand, there's a lot of companies that do get it right. A lot of governments do get it right. So why is it that it always kind of, as they say in the media business, if it bleeds, it leads. So is that also the case here, that in all these stories are so sensational when you hear about 1 billion records stolen or people's behaviors? Why is it? So let's start with you, Sepide. Why do you think it is that really we hear a lot more negative stories about privacy and surveillance than we hear about any of the more positive stuff?
So I think there are two things there. One is that when there are good news, like for example, the application that we have like COVID in Ontario, it doesn't get broadcasted as much as like when there's like a breach. And it is one of the reasons that people care about to know, okay, what are the data that got breached, and it's an important factor. And we talk about that more because we want to inform lots of people. One of the other problem I think, and I see, is that lots of times privacy and security come afterthoughts. So they're more of reactive things rather than proactive. Many times when there's a budget cut, for example, during the COVID, there were lots of smaller companies, they just let's go their security or privacy experts, because they thought, okay, they still need to develop applications, but like the chances of getting caught by breaches or something might be very low, so it doesn't matter. And that's one of the reasons that lots of people don't think about privacy or security from the beginning. And that's one of the aspects that lots of the regulations, the newer regulations, or also concepts like privacy by design or privacy engineering, they talk about. And so I think that that is the biggest basically aspects of being reactive rather than proactive, that we hear more of the breaches rather than like, okay, what was a success story, or what happens if you are protecting privacy from the beginning.
Great. Thank you, Sepide. So, Mariam, I'll turn to you now. So, based on this, your perspective more from an oversight regulation perspective, we keep hearing these stories, especially out of Europe, which has enacted GDPR, that there's a little bit more reporting on that side. And you said you've lived in both sides of the ocean. So what's your perspective? Is it also similar in Europe that you find that these kinds of stories kind of lead when they're negative, or is there more of a balance sort of in reporting when there are successes
Yeah.
of doing it right?
I mean, the news is supposed to be sensational, right? Nobody wants to hear, oh, this actually does what it says. Great. It's so boring. So, I mean, we shouldn't worry too much about what the news is saying. However, when there are breaches or when there are issues, they're sometimes so grand or so shocking that I think it gets everyone's attention. Like, I remember hearing about Target having an algorithm where they realized this teen girl was pregnant before she knew she's pregnant because of the items she was buying. And it's like, that's just crazy to a normal person, right? And I consider myself a normal person because I do not know how to code. So it's like it grabs your attention and you don't know how to react. But the way I look at AI is, if you look at any new invention throughout human history, we always realize the problems once we started using it. So we're just at that stage of exploration, and I think that's okay. We're gonna start to fix the problems as they come along, and we're gonna set industry standards and more security features. That was the case with airplanes, with cars. Cars didn't start with seatbelts and airbags. So we're just realizing where AI might be harmful. Even though it's not bodily harm, it's still a certain type of harm because it's an infringement of our privacy. It's an infringement of our right to have security. Sorry, that's my friend. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I think Europe is obviously ahead of America in terms of regulating this space. I'm not sure if regulating is the best approach. Especially, I talked to a friend of mine, Carlos Gutierrez. He does a lot of research on AI and regulation, and he thinks that making too many laws on it isn't good for developing the future of AI.
Great. Thank you, Mariam. I think our audience did a collective double take when you said you consider yourself a normal person because you don't code. I think most of our audience is actually, I'm just kidding. It's okay. It's all good.
I don't know how.
No, that's fine. Ikjot, I'll turn to you now. Same question, basically, in terms of your perspectives on why is it that we hear about this a lot more, when it's negative than when it's positive?
Vic, I think it's more about how you're presenting the information. I had both sides of experience. In the beginning, I was even scared to share my research because it would be so spooky, and why everybody would think they need to know this, right? And I didn't know how to present it well. So I remember for the first time when I shared that there is a location tracking and the privacy and all these concerns and issues, I just shared with non-technical people, and they were like, no. So this is a great news, but I don't know what to do about it. So they would be thinking that they are powerless, and you don't want to do it. You want to make them you want to make them feel they are empowered, right? And news does the exact opposite thing. So you want to know what you can do about it. So as an end user, you want to know how you are going to control your data. What rights do you have? And if we can inform equally on both sides, not just what's going wrong, but also what you can do about it, then that's better, I think. So like their right to privacy in almost every country, I would say almost every country. So I think what we are doing right now with the technology evolving, with the AI, we definitely know there will be going to changes the way the data is collected and be surveilled or having these implications. But it's equally important to inform the end users what they can do about it and how they play a role, and have some have to they can say something and we can change that, right? And also, since security and privacy have always been an afterthought, Mariam mentioned about the a job creation in future. I would say there also will be chief privacy officer, which will be required in those positions in the C-suite. And once we have that, then there will be a, I would say, assurance and at all levels in the companies as well as in general that there will be privacy compliance, and end users won't have to bother that much. And they, I don't think so. Everybody got that much time to understand that, right? Nobody needs to know or read the privacy in terms all the time, but it should be informed in a way which is meaningful, not meaningless. Today, we are not able to read 13 or 14 pages. It should be informed in a way so that everybody can understand that. And it's from news to be in, get, okay, news is supposed to educate you, but if it's educating you just on the one side, then it's wrong. So we need to focus on the both sides. That's what I would say.
That's very interesting. So, and that cues us up actually very nicely for the next question, which I'll put up in a minute. But the thing I want to comment is, it's very interesting that you've just touched on it, something about what people say they do versus what people actually do, right? So this is a famous thing that you mentioned, that everybody is against those complicated 13, 14, 50-page long EULAs, those end user license agreements in the abstract. But when they have to install a software and they want to sign up for a service, they hit the yes button as quick as anybody else. So that's actually fascinating. But I think this cues up a very interesting question. So from Hugo, so I know, Mariam, you had made an interesting comment about this notion of guilds and sort of self-regulation. So I think Hugo has a very interesting question. Which democratic process could we implement to inform the composition of such a fora that sets these uniform regulations?
I actually know Hugo, so that's funny.
Oh, great.
Thanks for the question.
Great.
Yeah, he's in legal tech as well. I love that question. And I must say that I found that, like, going to international lawmaking forums like the UN, the EU, the worst thing you can do is have a bunch of lawyers make the rules. You need experts who understand these rules, plus researchers and academics. Do not let in government representatives. They oftentimes are not the ones who should be there. And so I think, what democratic process? That's a fantastic question. Should we go back to the ancient Greek time and have a forum where people just yell out what they're thinking, or should we vote on it? I personally think that the best way of setting a standard is having a smaller group rather than a larger group, and they come up with a standard that is then sent out for comment. And I think that's just more efficient, because right now, when we try to have too much consensus, we end up creating things that don't make sense for the people who are in the field. And so it becomes kind of useless rules or useless standards. And that is my biggest concern with regulators coming at AI, because they really don't know what they're doing.
Mariam, are you trying to say it would go from meaningful to meaningless quickly if you just have a lot of people in that?
I think so.
Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah.
I think you need experts who understand the tech from from every aspect of it, plus academic researchers who've been looking at the topic intensely for years, and not just someone like the tech representative of government X, because they have to deal with so much that they really don't have the expertise on a particular subject matter. So you need subject matter experts, and you need a smaller group.
Very interesting. Sabine, would you like to add something to this?
I totally agree with Mariam about that. I remember when I was in Europe and they were working on the GDPR, there was a group of researchers working closely, had background like a group.
Do you need a team in the end?
Yes, you need a team in the end. And basically, there were like groups like need to be, as Mariam said, like technologists together with lawyers. So both sides have to work together. It can't be just one side. I know that some parts of GDPR was basically written like that. There were some groups of lawyers together with technologies that they were working on what can be done to make sure that the law is not like saying something that is not even possible to implement. So it has to be something that you can also say, okay, it can work in reality. It's not just a bunch of rules that really very abstract that you can't really even realize them. So it has to be a team, and I agree that it should not be a large team, because then it won't work. Sending out to people for comments, it's better than like having a larger team and like try to make consensus on everything with a larger team.
Very interesting. So we have a question here from Faria, which who I know as well, and very interesting question. I'm going to pull up a second question too, which is very closely related. So why don't we answer these questions jointly? So Faria is saying, a lot of AI is black box. We're talking about these chief privacy officers or these AI auditors. How will audits happen? And I think similarly, there was another earlier question which had to do with Sepide, you had mentioned the notion of explainability, interpretability in the context of algorithms, and they go hand in hand. So very closely related to Faria's question is this question. So how do you see this happen? I mean, it's well and good to say that the government or whoever, some self-regulating body can require these things, but until those technological breakthroughs happen, are we somehow saying that people can only use so-called transparent algorithms or transparent models, or are we saying that how does the regulation then actually get operationalized if, in fact, as Faria indicated, a lot of these AI algorithms and black boxes are in fact black boxes? Sepide, let's start with you.
Yeah, these are very good questions, and I think when we so one of the parts of like AI, like inference is one part, but we have some means to be able to protect like against like some kind of, for example, inference attacks for differential privacy and federated learning at the same time. So even though like lots of things might happen behind the scene, we still have some means to be able to protect the individuals. For example, if we are not transferring the data to the companies themselves, and like all of the inference happens on the device themselves. That's one aspect. When you are doing in aggregation, you are basically collecting data and aggregated data and having it at a higher level, removing the identifiable information. That also might help with avoiding like having certain types of inference and still give meaningful like support or like applications to the user to be able to use, but not collecting in every individual data points from them. So that's one of the things. I know that, for example, I don't believe that all of the big tech companies are doing whatever they have to do, but some of them are doing a little bit better. For example, I know like Apple doesn't collect even when you agree that your device will be used as being like a machine for doing like analysis. They have a certain threshold to how many data points they can collect during 24 hours, for example. So those are the things that they can help with, like not knowing what happens behind the scene. And we have some of the means. Also, for example, I was talking with third-party APIs. Yes, as the app developers, you might not know, but we also have to enforce those regulations on third-party APIs that we are using those, that they are basically protecting privacy, and not everything that is just out there without like knowing that what are they doing, even though we might not be 100% sure about like that they are protecting privacy, but at least up to certain level of assurance we should have on them.
Great, thank you. So Ikjot, let me build on this question and ask you, so, in your research, you proposed that framework to do privacy assessments. Did you actually consider as an element in your framework the notion of whether or not a algorithm is leading to explainable outputs, or whether in fact the model itself is transparent? Was that an element? Did you think about it? If not, why not? What role does that play in your privacy assessment framework?
So can you repeat the question for the model? Like the
Yes,
part that
absolutely.
you mentioned about the model?
Yes, sure. So the question was that in your framework, did you actually have as one of the items that you use as an evaluation, whether or not a model is explainable, whether or not a algorithm is leading to a black box prediction? Was that a concern for you in the framework that you developed?
I have not directly had that in my requirements, but that would be because this was the first step, and the thesis is called as towards the privacy framework. This would be something additional when we are going to look into the data collection and overall using AI on top of the information. What I was doing was more on a manual side. But if we are going to collect, and it was on the based on the city scenario only. So if we have larger data sets and over long time periods, we are going to have the assessments. Then I think then at that point we need to have this, and that's very very much required. So also there are one of the main reasons to have that privacy assessment framework was to have equitable assessment. The problem was the models itself for a network model within the when you simulate it, because we didn't have the test beds here. So when you simulate the models, which are network, and how mobility models are being, which is like how traffic is going within a city versus how an adversary is placed, and based on that you are having the privacy assessment. So the models itself for those should not be biased. So definitely that's one of the, I would say, not from the AI perspective, but based on the discrimination or the bias, the models definitely mean a lot, how you're creating them and how you are using them for the assessments.
Okay, thank you. So, Mariam, we'll do one question now directed more towards you. This is a very interesting question from Alexei. So, should people have full rights to give up their privacy in exchange for some value, such as better recommendations, even if it is against current regulations, or is it dangerous? So, we can even think about it as what kinds of regulations should they be? Optional regulations? Should they be mandatory regulations? Because here it's saying it's a regulation, but you may have the option to. So, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, what a great question. I always like to draw analogies. So in most countries in the world, you're not allowed to sell your kidneys. It's not allowed. In Iran, you can. So it's kind of like, or in some countries, you're allowed to sell your body for prostitution. In other countries, you're not. So that question is fascinating because we don't really have morals around our data, do we? We don't have morals around our right to privacy. It's kind of like each person's choice here. And I think in theory, you should be allowed to sell your data, and that kind of goes to what the Yang was saying about data is money. So I think yes, why not? There is no moral code around our data or privacy. Maybe in 100 years we'll have all these moral compasses around these things, but right now, freedom all the way. And if you can make money from it, why not?
That's an interesting answer, because then this brings up another question. So, since Ikjot does a lot of research with autonomous vehicles, the question is who owns that data, right? So if I'm driving a vehicle, it's my data about my driving from point A to point B, but is it actually something I signed off when I bought the car that says actually, it's getting uploaded through your router or through a GSM signal to the home server of that car manufacturer? Right. So I think that also brings up that interesting question. Ikjot, your perspectives on that. You've looked at these connected vehicles, as you mentioned, autonomous or otherwise. So really, who has that data? I mean, whose data is it? Is it the car driver's data? Is it the owner's data? Or is it the data of the company who they signed when they purchased the car, whose server all of this data is getting updated to?
I would say this is the most interesting conversation I ever had because you brought all the questions that I've been thinking for a very long time. So one of the things that once you share the data, that data is actually users' data, and you should give the consent that you want to share it with other vehicles, right? That's how it is. But if you know about the OnStar program on GM, uh, so that program has your all information, where are you going, and they do OTA, which is over the air updates. So that means wherever you are, they can update. It's a software update that would happen, right? But what happens overall, they know where are you going, what are you using, and all your information. And recently, I came to know about a little incident that what happens with the top end OEMs, or there's a car manufacturer. Somebody got the second-hand car, And after removing everything they thought that they have cleaned it, the data is clean and everything has been done for giving it to new person. But when the new person has received the car, they had the previous owners all information, calls, contacts, what happened, what were the trips. And now it would raise the questions why that data was there and who was responsible to remove it. So these are some of the things which would, I think, come into awareness of people when they would see these scenarios. So that's what started happening. So now it's become more of a questions. So if there are certain programs like OnStar, which is like from the OEMs itself or the car manufacturers, then they own the data. Then it's on to them, right? If we are thinking about V2X, which is vehicle to everything or vehicle to vehicle communication, that means your device will have, like our phones today have one of the chip that enables Wi-Fi or a cellular network, right? So that means you are giving consent that this is your device and you are going to share your information, right? You download an app and then that's what happens. Similarly, it will be for the vehicle. It's your vehicle, you put that chip on it and then you are starting broadcasting that data. So that means you're giving the consent. But the problem comes in, I think that was one of the questions, that if you opt out of it, then what would happen? That means you going to be part of that network or not? Are you going to use that service or not? And I can just indicate that in before Trump's administration, in 2020, it was going to be mandate for vehicle to vehicle communication as to be put on all the vehicles, and everybody has to use it. So think about if you do not have an opting out option and you have to broadcast all the information and it's being sent in unencrypted manner, then how much of surveillance is there? And it doesn't require cameras at that point. And that's why I was aware of this, and that's what I picked for my thesis as well. So you can imagine
Sure.
the problem. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll do one last question, go around the panelists, and then we'll close after that. So this is a very interesting question from Roger, and I think all of you touched upon this when we were talking about the second question around standards. So as relations between certain countries become rocky, is there a risk that we'll end up with multiple standards? You know, that's the joke about standards, right? The standards, because there's so many of them. So the question here is, Sepide, I'll turn to you first. Is really what's going on here? Are we going to end up seeing this proliferation of multiple competing standards, or do you think eventually you envision kind of a coalescing around some core principles that will then become enshrined into some kind of a universally accepted standard? Sepide, over to you.
So I hope that we will have some standards that they are not competing and they are basically having like a central goal, similar to what Mariam said about analogy, for example, with cars, that now we have standards for certain security levels that we need in a car, like having seatbelt, or in airplanes, all of these things. So I hope that it will be in the same way. At least in the Western world, as we saw, the GDPR set the language. And for example, in California, now they have CCPA, which is very similar to GDPR. I don't say that is one-to-one mapping, but it has all the core regulations and legalities that GDPR has. And it's one of the closest regulations to GDPR. And I know that this will eventually be the same for most of the Western countries. And I know there's an arm race between US or West and China, but I hope that at some point everybody realizes that this is similar to everything else that we had in the past. And it takes time, as Mayam said. It might be like a few years, like, I don't know, a decade or so, that like finally we get to a point that, okay, we don't need to have a trade-off between having these cool technologies and AI, and then like also protecting ourselves and protecting our data. And I think eventually we get to that point that we will have some standards that are kind of hopefully very similar, at least if not like 100%. But I don't think that it will be as soon or fast as we want it to be.
Thank you, Sepide. So, Mariam, just a variation on this question. Do you end up, do you think that this is going to end up as a umbrella of sort of a catch-all, one standard or whatever we want to call it, regulation? Or do you think it actually be multiple separate regulations that essentially will be somewhat coherent, if not fully, totally compatible? How do you see this shaping out?
Yeah.
One big thing or multiple little things?
Great question. So I think the way EU tries to make laws is they try to make a law that makes other people comply, even if they're outside the EU. So they're not going to force you, but they're going to make their own laws so rigid that if you want to have any kind of operations in the EU, you have to be compliant. So I think eventually that's what's going to happen. There is going to be this really stringent standard that if you don't comply, you can't operate. And so we see that happening already. And then the reverse is also happening in China. If Facebook and Google don't want to comply with China's internal policies, they cannot operate there. China is a very fascinating country because they're so strong. They don't need to actually give in to pressure. So perhaps they'll be one of the last ones to join. However, I think the EU can be very influential with the way they make their standards because they can be so strict.
Very interesting. And over to you, Ekjot. So, similar to kind of the answer you gave. So same question, but a slight variation. You talked about kind of ownership of a device or ownership of a vehicle, and really how this is done. So do you almost envision an ensemble or a portfolio of standards around, okay, well, when a vendor has certain kind of information versus when the user has a certain kind of information? So do you see a comprehensive catch-all kind of regulation or standard, or do you see maybe multiple different, done not necessarily in the context of countries or regions, really more from the perspective of who actually happens to hold that data that is being mined? I don't hear you. Ekjot, is your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I was saying it's a very interesting question because it's more about the entire supply chain or the pipeline that we have. It's not just the end user. It's not just the manufacturer on one end. I believe it's more about how it's going to tie up at all levels. That's why it's, especially I closely work with the automotive security, and it needs to have a overarching standard itself. So right now that's one of the standards, ISO 21434, which is in the development. So that's trying to cover almost all the bases. So that's what we're trying to do, I think, in security, and something which would be looking for privacy as well, with respect to automotive. And it should happen at all levels, not giving responsibility on only one level and just distributing at all levels. We cannot hear you, Vic.
Thank you for that answer. And I was going to say that's the last question, but how about a yes, no? How about we end with a yes, no? This is a great question from Krishan that just came in. Just a yes, no. Do you think that the proprietary data that are owned by these mega corporations should be turned into a public property? Just a yes, no answer. Let's start with you, Mariam.
Oh, God, no.
Okay, no. Sepide, you?
I would say I haven't thought about it, so I don't know. I won't say yes or
that's
no.
fair. That's fair. Ekjot, and you?
It's no.
Okay, it's a no. So the interesting thing is now this is my plug for the next time we have the three of you over, is if you want to know the rationale for why all of you said what you said, we'll have to have you back and have another one of these conversations. But look, this was great. I really enjoyed meeting up with my friends and having this great conversation and lots of great questions. I apologize if there were questions in the chat I couldn't really ask because of the interest of time. But we have an amazing content calendar lined up, so I'll be advertising those events on LinkedIn and meetup.com, etc. So please stay tuned, and thank you again, Mariam and Sepide and Ekjot, for making the time from your busy schedules to come and share your insights, your foresight, and really looking forward to having you back in a couple of weeks, couple of months to see how your perspectives change. And like I said, to explain the rationale for why you gave the answer to the last question that you just gave. So thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of this session. Have a nice day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.